In the previous talk, I looked at 2 out of 3 of the main theoretical stages that I've divided the growth of the social sciences into: cyclical time and progressive and evolutionary time. Here I want to look at the 3rd main phase, namely structuralism, and then at some of the possible reasons for these changes. Structuralism is based on other metaphors, and it includes in this treatment not just structuralism as it was known in the later 20th century, but all kinds of theoretical systems which tended to look at social structures and social organization in a fairly static way. The metaphor now has returned from the organic to a machine metaphor, whose internal workings we must know. It's also a geological metaphor, layers within a system, whether deep structures, superficial structures in linguistic structuralism, or the mind has the surface and the deeper side, or societies have deep structures and then the superficial, and so on. Meaning lies within the present in these in this paradigm, and within the system. What a thing has been, what it potentially may be, is no longer as important as what it is. Let us understand it for what it is. Some classic statements of this internalist interpretation are made by Radcliffe Brown in the preface, revised preface to his famous book, The Andaman Islanders. Not the 1922 edition, but the later one, when he became more convinced of the social structural view. He contrasted this structural approach to that of the developmentalists against whom he was reacting. He writes, in 1908-9, when the writing of this book was undertaken, anthropologists and ethnologists were concerned with formulating hypotheses as to the origins of institutions, or with attempts to provide hypothetical reconstructions of the details of culture history. In both types of inquiry, the historical point of view was dominant. While ethnologists were mostly thinking in terms of origins and history, there was developing in the work of the French sociologists a different conception of the use of ethnological data. He then quotes Hubert, who worked with Marcel Mauss. He then tries to define what he means by this structural approach. The meaning of a word, a gesture, a rite, lies in what it expresses, and this is determined by its associations within a system of ideas, sentiments, and mental attitudes. The notion of function in ethnology is a word that's often used this time to be synonymous with anthropology, rests on the conception of culture as an adaptive mechanism, notice the word mechanism, machine, by which a certain number of human beings are enabled to live a social life as an ordered community in a given environment. It is convenient to use the term social integration to cover all the phenomena of internal adaptation. One of the fundamental problems of a science of culture, or of a human society, is therefore the problem of the nature of social integration. It's what holds things together that has now become the problem. The discovery of the integrative function of an institution, usage, or belief is to be made through the observation of its effects, and these are obviously, in the first place, effects on individuals, on their life, their thoughts and their emotions. The question now is, what is holding things together? Things fall apart, the centre cannot hold, as Yeats had put it in 1916. and the question was, what can stop things falling apart? We've seen here that Radcliffe Brown sees the meaning as lying in the context, in the relation of the parts to each other, in their function. But I often gave the example in lectures of a bicycle. A structural analysis of a bicycle would say, well, here's a wheel. What is this wheel doing for the bicycle? It's making it possible for the bicycle to go along, among other things. So, or what are the handlebars doing? So it's a relation between the parts and the function of the parts. And you analyze a system. This is close to systems theory. You analyze a system like a machine, and you look at the function of the different parts. This is well developed in chapter 5 of Radcliffe Brown's book, which was similar in the first edition of 1622, though it was probably written a lot earlier. Every custom and belief of a primitive society plays some determinate part in the social life of the community, just as every organ of a living body plays some part in the general life of the organism. The mass of institutions, customs and beliefs form a single whole or system that determines the life of a society. To continue the analogy, and analogies are very important, the study of the meaning of savage customs, they still used the word savage in those days, is a sort of social psychology, physiology, the study of the body, and is to be distinguished from the study of origins or changes of custom, in just the same way that animal physiology is distinguished from the biology that deals with the origins of species, the causes of variations, and the general laws of evolution. The problems that this chapter presents are therefore not historical, but psychological or sociological. Thus, the subject of the present chapter is not in any way affected by questions of the historical origins of the customs with which it deals, but is concerned only with those customs as they exist in the present day. Thus, structuralism is a dissection, a physiology, a mechanics, a static analysis, these are my words, at a point in time. And this is contrasted to developmentalism and evolutionism, which is a movement through time. I've taken Radcliffe Brown because he gives a very clear and lucid account of what is truly an intellectual revolution of that time, which encompassed all the social sciences. And it basically came to dominate all the social sciences, and particularly anthropology and sociology, from around the time of the First World War, and a little before, right through to the 1950s and 60s, when it took a new form in French structuralism. For example, in 1950, in the preface to the famous preface to the book with Radcliffe Brown and Meyer Fortes, The African Systems of Kinship and Marriage, they wrote, "The theory here proposed is simply a special application of the theory that the raison d'être, the reason for being of an institution or custom, is to be found in its social function. The theory is therefore that the rules or customs relating to prohibited or preferred marriage have for their social function to preserve, maintain or continue an existing kinship structure as a system of institutional relations." So this is a structural, functional view of things, which continues right through into the 60s. So to conclude on this main stages, you have pre-evolutionism, cyclical time, you have evolutionism, and you have post-evolutionism, functionalism and structuralism. Very roughly they correspond in Western history to the three great phases of Western expansion and contraction. Up to 1700, Europe is basically on a level, as I'll explain later, with other parts of the world. It doesn't dominate in any way. It was still uncertain whether the Mongols would invade and take it over. It was still uncertain whether Islam would dominate Europe. Europe was on a par with the rest of the world. Then increasingly in the 18th century, with the outward expansion and the voyages and the growing power with the Industrial Revolution, for the next couple of centuries, Europe really thrust outwards and conquered much of the world and dominated it, particularly in the British Empire. And then from the end of the 19th century, the rise of Japan, the debacle of this First World War, Europe became again not so dominant, and the rise of America also challenged a Eurocentric view of the world. And the three great phases of the that I'm looking at really fit with those three great changes, and I'll expand that in a minute. What I think is that how one perceives and treats time and social theories is related to one's, not internally to the theories themselves, but to changes on the political, economic, technological front outside those theories. The growing knowledge about the rest of the world, the growing knowledge about time and its depth through geology and so on. And this shifts the way we think about life. Roughly, just to reiterate, to 1750, there's a rough equality in the globe, in power systems. China is a mighty power, India is a mighty power, Islam and so on, as I say. Between 1750 and 1820, you begin to get a sense that certainly Britain, Northern Europe, something special is happening, and there's a growing technological sophistication. From about 1850 to 1900, there's a massive technological and political growth. European weapons, European steam engines and so on become demonstrably more powerful than any other technologies in the world. From 1900 to 1950, there's a retreat from absolute superiority. There are two world wars. There's the rise of Japan, of the Soviet Union, and outside Europe of America. And then from 1950 to 1980, 90, America becomes the dominant power, and you again get, as I'll explain, the regrowth of a different kind of evolutionary thought as America dominates. So the important thing is, why do these paradigms change? I've hinted at it several times, but I think the main reason that I'd like to explore is the gap in technology and politics between different parts of the world. And I've already suggested that this is to do with the balance between different parts of the world. The coincidence of this can be seen in various ways. The developmental evolutionist phase can be seen within its context. The idea of progress provided the intellectual stimulus, and I'm quoting, for the view that human society began with a stage of savagery, advanced to barbarism. This is a sort of 19th century view of Morgan and Tyler and others to a certain extent, and then achieved the final threshold of civilized development. The developmental epoch, and this is from Vogt's History of Anthropology, the developmentalist epoch corresponded in time with the emergence and expansion of industrialization in the West. Its decline came when the expansion of empires halted because there were no new lands and peoples to conquer. Europe, as well as the United States, ended a frontier type of expansion and entered a period of consolidation from empire to colonialism, imperialism to colonialism in the British case, for instance. Or again, anthropological development was an institutional product of the West. The expansion of the West into the far corners of the globe, this is Vogt again, made possible the internationalizing of anthropology as the science of mankind. Without Western penetration and conquest, ethnologists as anthropologists could have developed their subject matter, but it would have been difficult. Now, ambiguities regarding the goals and the divisions of the world at large are penetrating anthropology. In other words, we're less sure of our mission because of another phase of politics and eroding confidence in its scientific mission. This is written in the middle of the 20th century by Vogt. There is a correlation between these phases and optimism. If you feel you are on the top of the heap, that your technologies are much better, that there has been rapid and massive change, that things seem to be getting better, then you are optimistic and radical. Hence, evolutionism, whether in anthropology or in history, is strangely a radical and optimistic view, almost liberal, for it believes that things can be made better, and it's often tied in with a mission, the civilizing mission. We have the answers, let's take it out. A famous example were, of course, the missionaries, the Christian missionaries who went around the world, but also the economic missionaries who said, that's what we can do. I mean, one of the famous statements, of course, is in Kipling's poem, The White Man's Burden, which, if you just take that one line, then you think it's very patronizing, but the other lines of that stanza show the kind of mission. Take up the white man's burden, the savage wars of peace, fill up the mouth of famine, and bid the sickness cease. So the white man's burden was to get rid of war, famine, and disease, and it was believed to be a possible mission. Whereas if things aren't static and all the world is similar, then you have a rather more pessimistic view that we're stuck, economic recession and so on and so on. So there are paradigm shifts, and they are at the level of whole civilizations, the cosmology of capitalism, a zeitgeist, a spirit of an age, or in Kuhn's phrase, a paradigm shift. And this is recognized briefly by a number of anthropologists as much more than just a set of ideas. It's a moral, social, whole way of thinking and being. For example, Ernest Gellner describes evolutionism, the central phase, in a broad sense, incorporates both biological and historically inspired brands, and both continuity and jump stressing, sudden visions of upward movement. He says it was more than a theory. It was a philosophy, a theodicy, that is a theological system, a moral vision, a surrogate for religion. It saw in evolution and progress the key notions in which human life was to be interpreted and human suffering justified. These notions did not merely explain, they conferred moral meaning and order on the world. And this is true not merely of evolutionism, as Ernest Gellner talks about, but also of the earlier cyclical views. You interpreted, you had a moral vision there, and also of the structural period which mainly dominated the 20th century. So, in terms of a diagram, which I will insert here, you have to 1500 circular time going round like that. Then you have the development of spatial time. Then you have slightly progressive time. Then you have a reaction against progressivism, which I'll go into when things go up a bit and then drop down and up. Maybe there's a slight tendency upwards. Then muted progress, then high-level evolution, very rapid evolution. Then structuralism, time is more static again. And then from the 1950s, 60s, a muted progress and a new form of evolutionism. So there's periods of growth and optimism, periods of despair. Hence Geoffrey Hawthorne wrote a history of the sociology called Enlightenment and Despair, which captures two of these periods. And I'll end with a final diagram where you have, in which I lay out time and space. In tribal and traditional societies, time is in a loop or in a sort of snake, or it oscillates a bit back and forth, as Edmund Leach pointed. And space is divided between us and them. In the long period of peasant early civilizations, agrarian civilizations, you have longer cycles like the Ibn Khaldun cycle, but it in the end is circular. You don't have progress. And here you have larger units. Us is a large group civilization, and them, the famous example is the Middle Kingdom. China is the Middle Kingdom, it's the middle of the world. And round it has tributary states, and then round that it has barbarians like the British and others in different lands. A circular view of space. And then from the 17th century, 18th century, you have the growth of serial time, of linear time, of unfurling of the curl, and the growth of time. And space spreads out. You have a knowledge of many more varieties of how people live in different worlds, and of their economic and ecological and political systems, and progressivism and the Enlightenment. And then you have rapid growth. Time becomes more rapidly growing, and space goes sideways. You know much more about other societies. Time depth also increases, and you get the Darwinian revolution with the idea that human beings have not just been on this planet and other things for a few thousand years, but for millions of years. This planet has existed and changed. And then you get functionalism, structuralism, with breaking up time into little lumps. There may be some sort of development, but you're not really interested in history so much, and continuity and origins. The word origins goes out, origins of species or whatever. You are interested in the functioning of systems as they are. And time also, space also in a funny way becomes smaller. So you have micro studies. Anthropologists are famous for looking at particular places. You have the study of micropolitics, microsociology, and so on. So these, I think, are the main paradigm shifts, the three ones, and the rest of the talks and lectures will be looking at them in more detail and trying to understand in each case why one changed into another, and breaking each one down into smaller subparts, because obviously this is a gross oversimplification into three phases. Thanks.